So, good evening. I'd like to bring this regular meeting of Council to order, Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inkla, Katmuks, and Syilx people. I will figure out how to pronounce that name sooner or later. And while we're here, I'd also like to introduce our newest team member, Kim Mullen, who is our Communications and Engagement Manager. Welcome to the team, Kim.
Thank you.
We have missed communications, I tell you. It's great to see you here. There are no late items, from what I understand, and that leaves us public input. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? Not at the public hearing, but public input.
No, nobody.
Okay, thank you. I saw the lips, but I didn't hear. That brings us to 4.1, adoption of the minutes, and it's recommended that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on June 14th, 2022 be adopted. So Echart and Christofferson, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None. Carried. This moves us into our public hearing. And this is convened to consider the following proposed bylaw, the City of Merritt Official Community Plan, bylaw number 2336-2022. And the purpose of this public hearing is to allow those who believe their interest in land is affected to make their views known prior to further discussion of this bylaw. Written materials are also received prior to midday on Friday, June 22nd. All submissions, whether oral, written, or by video, are given equal weight. The public hearing is not a time for council to debate with individual presenters. However, council does wish to hear your views, and where further clarity is required, council may ask questions of the speaker. Mr. Lois, our Corporate Services Officer, have the statutory advertising requirements for the OCP bylaw 2336-2022 been met?
Yes, Your Worship. On June 16th and June 23rd, 2022, notice was published in the Merritt Herald announcing that this hearing would take place. Following that, we had a number of public residents who came to front counter at City Hall in order to view copies of the OCP and read it and to decide what comments and submissions they wanted to make. We also, as always, published this on our city's public hearings portal that went live on the 14th of June 2022. No written submissions were received by the deadline for the agenda dispatch. I believe one written submission was received via roundabout channels this afternoon, and that was sent to all members of council.
Thank you. So this further submission has been provided after the deadline, but I'm going to allow this submission to be part of our submissions. Some of these issues are going to be dealt with by Mr. MacArthur later on, and we'll deal with the issue of that later on in 8.1, I believe. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, this of course is the next stage in the journey that began in early 2020. On May 24th, Council gave first and second readings to the OCP bylaw, and also at that meeting discussed the bylaw in relation to the city's financial plan and waste management plan. The bylaw was subsequently forwarded to the TNRD for consideration of the regional context statement, and TNRD accepted that statement on June 16th at the previous board meeting. The Agricultural Land Commission was provided the bylaw some time ago as well and provided comments back to us last night. So we can discuss those comments at third reading if council would desire to do so, as well as in relation to potential amendments related to those comments. So for the public area, I'm going to keep my comments brief because we have Nola Kilmartin here from WSP, who's the OCP consultant, and she has a PowerPoint presentation that she'd like to share with all of you. So I'll call upon Nola to come up now.
Excuse me. It will be in a moment.
Great. Okay, is that a little better?
For online, it's fine, but for us, we need to hear you as well. So we're not hearing it through the mic.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, your worship, city councilors, thank you for your time today. My name is Nola Kilmartin. I am the planning manager with WSP in British Columbia, and I'm very pleased to be here with you all this evening. So we can just go to the next slide. That's all right. So for the public hearing today, I will stick to some key information, including the project team, the OCP process to date, some of the background and engagement strategy, the vision, and some key focus areas because I think I've been allotted about half an hour, so try to keep it concise. So the team that has worked on this project is extensive, so everyone is certainly not included here, but of course Dawn is here to answer any of the detailed questions that may arise, as am I. Within WSP, we had a team that included community planners, civil engineers, climate change specialists, as well as transportation specialists. So those are some of the folks who have contributed to the development of the plan. So throughout, there have been 5 stages, starting with engagement planning, so what the overall approach was going to be, moving into a background analysis, a lot of fact-finding and interviews and workshops and different sessions with committees in phase 2, and then public engagement events in phases 3 and 4, in addition to the document draft and development. And here we are today, very close to the finish line in phase 5. So within the background report, phase 2 included development which helped us shape the direction of the OCP draft. So this includes community context, population growth projections, household individual income and employment numbers, as well as projections. There were also a number of opportunities and challenges identified as important to the community and council and other community groups. So, I'm sure you're all very familiar with a number of these items, including limited land area that's suitable for residential, commercial, or industrial uses, being able to address population growth and encourage the appropriate land use mix to support employment areas, agriculture, encourage residential densification, and explaining what infill means and what it can do and what it can't do. Affordable housing options and supporting modal shifts in transportation. That elusive goal of having all that valuable land less allocated to parking spaces, right? And yet accommodating everybody at the same time. So I'll pop on to the next slide. Could we go full screen, actually? I didn't notice that. We could go maximize or...
Easy to have multiple screen with that in PDF format, right? If it was PowerPoint, that would be.
Top left to view.
Yep.
Just on that screen, if you keep it up.
Page display.
There should be a full. That's okay. If everyone can see it, we'll just keep going. So there's that. There we go. All right, so onto the engagement strategy, which was 4 phases. So it sought to reach stakeholders and community members to create a collective vision for the future of the city. And as you all know, due to public health orders faced by all communities, but on top of that, Merritt in particular faced numerous challenges between extreme heat, fire threats, and flooding, of course, in November. This created some major shifts and adjustments, and at the end of the day, the team did reach their target engagement goals that were set out at the start, but obviously additional time and effort was absolutely necessary. So you can go on to the next slide. So
we suspect it may have been delayed.
Yes, it's a very, very good guess. So with the engagement strategy phases, the adjustments weren't just necessary for achieving engagement goals, obviously, but revisions to some of the technical assessments which would impact the OCP were necessary after the flood. So an additional phase 4 was added to give everyone involved some time to adjust and process and reassess what, sober second look, as it were. So within phase 1, there were a number of stakeholder visioning workshops from business and economic development, land use and housing topics, infrastructure and climate change, as well as business and culture, and poverty reduction and food security were all important topics identified. Within some of the sector-specific workshops, there's the bench and North Bench, and I meant to ask Dawn to pronounce, is it Collettville, pardon me, and South Merritt, North Nicola, Diamond Vale, and West Merritt, as well as City Centre and the airport. So within phase 2, that was completed by administration, so that was heavy on engagement with council and multiple committee of the whole meetings as well. Moving into phase 3, so that was in fall of 2021, there was the initial draft of the OCP, which was pre-flood, and then a presentation to council and the public. In phase 4, there was a revised draft and again presentation to council and the public. So there has been that extension, and it was absolutely necessary. So you can go on to the next slide. So
can I stop you for a moment?
Of course.
Mr. MacArthur, can you explain what we changed in phase 4 as a result of the flood? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Further to Nola's explanation, we specifically focused on climate action strategies and the flood mitigation strategies in particular. So there were a number of changes. There was also additional changes that residents had provided a lot of feedback just prior to when the last draft was released just prior to the flood, and so we incorporated all of that feedback as well, which thankfully to a lot of really passionate residents, we had some really detailed information there. So yeah, so the draft from the fall to the draft this spring had quite a lot of revisions to it, and I think it's made the document a lot stronger. So really appreciate everyone's input from everyone in the community that provided input.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we're going to do just a highlight, kind of a highlight reel of a number of those key focus areas. And there are quite a few slides on different climate action policies. So moving along with the vision and into the key focus areas. So I think you may know that the document's somewhere in the 200 plus range, so we won't cover everything today, but we can move ahead into talking about climate action, housing reconciliation, city center revitalization, and vibrancy as those key focus areas that we have time for today that are important. So you can go to the next slide. So effectively, the biggest themes when the community was asked about how to address climate-related issues and concerns, there were the mitigation strategies to protect life and property, of course, and then issues related to emissions and the environmental responsibility of the community and as a community. So we've got a number of the policy highlights. There are quite a few of these slides, so we can roll through. So we've got notable policies related to green infrastructure, so related to increasing the tree canopy, improving biodiversity, monitoring, managing invasive species, as well as habitat offset in the banks. There are groundwater and riparian protection policies, reestablishing riparian areas, improving their condition and quality, restricting development where impact to groundwater could occur, policies along on air quality, so including a monitoring station, and promoting active transportation modes to reduce vehicle emissions. There's also creating climate change response plans and education and resources for climate change preparedness. On drought, there are policies related to xeriscaping guidelines, policies on new developments for reducing water consumption, strategies reducing the city's use, as well as a water metering program. Also considerations, of course, in light of all the extreme heat that happened last year, cooling centers, looking at ways to incorporate heat exposure measures, and hitting a tree planting target related to the tree canopy overall, and examining different kinds of exterior building materials to mitigate that heat island effect. Onto wildfires and severe smoke, so following fire smart principles, of course, education about fire-resistant building materials, and a smoke alert policy and procedures for those warnings. Of course, the flooding portion of this, I believe the work is still underway, but there was a significant amount of work done and continues to be done on this topic. So there's been an update to the emergency plans flood preparedness section, continued mitigation of flood mitigation measures, continuing to inspect dikes and berms along the rivers, and new infrastructure has to be viewed kind of with a new lens, considering future climate change and flood mitigation considerations. There are also policies on GHG reductions, so a target of 50% in the city's GHGs by 2030, incorporation of some kind of more local efforts regarding solar powered streetlights, EV charging stations, so you've got lots out here already, and improving active transportation infrastructure to make that an easier option for people. So on housing, of course, this was a very important topic to the community, I think to all of the committees as well as council. So definitely heard that there has been a lack of affordable housing. There's, like many communities throughout BC and the rest of Canada, the infrastructure is aging, which makes infill and multifamily a challenge to develop. Lack of housing diversity, so what those types are for different household sizes, as well as types and tenures. And when you look at the assessments of current housing conditions, and some of the improvements that are required to improve those housing conditions. So there are policies related to the future housing percentage, so the ratios of what needs to be medium and high density housing. I won't go through all of the detail on that, it's a bit dense, so I'll save that for another time. And then, providing a range of housing types and not having those monocultures in neighborhoods, so you've got that variety and that mix, as well as developing an overall housing strategy to dig a bit deeper into approach. So there's also encouraging developers and working with the development industry to include 30% affordable units, allowing for density bonusing for inclusion of affordable or different kinds of special needs housing, and partnerships for special needs or affordable housing units. And then that graphic kind of illustrates the kind of density, the housing form that goes along with those density numbers of 15 units per hectare to 150 on the low to medium scale, and then the medium high would be 120 units per hectare to 225, which is your kind of low to low mid-rise apartment multifamily buildings. So on to reconciliation. Indigenous consultation was conducted with City of Merritt administration and WSP's Indigenous Relations Specialist. So the city, I understand, has recently implemented a land acknowledgement statement as well. You can go on to the next slide. So there needs to be a memorandum of understanding with the bands and a reconciliation plan to create and improve relationships and processes. I think there were the 5 traditional bands and a 6th band that was consulted with throughout the process. So we can There was Coldwater, Cooks Ferry, Lower Nicola, Nuage, Shaken, and Upper Nicola as well. So we can go on to City Center, please. So a lot of these discussions around the city center revitalization were informed by discussions with council and steering committees, Tourism Merritt, TNRD, the community, and representatives from different festivals and events as well. So a lot of those improvement areas were about safety and walkability, aesthetic improvements, as well as active transportation connections, bless you, and more housing in the city center as well, which is always needed to support revitalization efforts. So some of it is to the policies direct incorporating more housing to accommodate more population, of course, and ensure the right amenities are in place to support a vibrant sense of community downtown. So you can go to the next slide. So, I think what's important to note, there are those aesthetic considerations, and then there are also those more basic safety considerations that families and tourists are looking for in a downtown when they visit. So that's related to lighting and sidewalk continuity and showing a sense of community pride, and that sense of economic vitality in a downtown is important. It's attractive, and it creates that draw people are looking for. Merritt's in such a great location and so close to so many other urban areas and centers. So it certainly should be a stop for folks or a destination. Go to the next slide, thank you. So the project team very clearly heard from council and the community. Merritt is a wonderful place to live, to work, and to raise a family. So policies are found throughout the OCP to ensure quality of life, community health, and well-being for all ages or stages of life, and positive social interactions are supported by the OCP. And clear direction is given on the road to implementation. It's not just, the apple, hood, and mother pie statements or warm and fuzzy statements, but details on how to achieve these outcomes and implement them. So, as your consulting team, we want to say congratulations to you all. It's a lot of work doing these projects. The completion is really a celebration of the community, and it's no small undertaking, and you've had to do this through extremely trying times as well. So this is a guiding document. It's intended to reflect the future aspirations of Merritt through a vision, goals, and supporting policies. And this document will help Merritt continue to grow into a desirable and inclusive community that values people, nature, and opportunity, and encourages the community to flourish together. And I think, Dawn, I didn't catch the staff member's name who took that photo, so if you would mind speaking to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. If you'd mind going back one slide. There we go.
Thank you. And Mr. MacArthur, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, this photo was taken by our Public Works staff member, Kevin Vilak, and what a great photo it is, showing the resiliency of the community, the tulip that's growing through the mud in the flood zone. So I have a couple of these growing on my property now too, and yeah, it's I think it really encompasses the hope that we have for the community moving forward, and really a perfect way to end this this bylaw, I think, and move forward in the community.
I told Dawn, since I had a kid, I cry a lot, so it's like, get choked up, absolutely. Also, so that's thank you very much.
Any questions for our presenter or for Mr. MacArthur? No comment. Thank you very much. We appreciate your participation in this event, and it's been a long haul, and I know how hard staff have worked to get to this point, but it's taken the whole community to actually work together to bring it to this point. So we're not there yet. It's not approved yet, but we're getting there, and it's closer than it's ever been at this point. So thank you all who have worked on this.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
So I'd like to ask if there's any public member who wishes to speak for or against this bylaw. If so, please come forward and do so now and state your name and address for the record. Don't all come at once. So I ask for a second time, if anyone wishes to speak for or against this bylaw, please come forward. Who's going to come first?
I'm never one to refuse to speak. Good. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Brown and Council, for holding this public hearing tonight. My name is Susan Rolene, and I live at 2499 Chapman Street. I am here this evening in multiple capacities to speak to the official community plan rewrite. Many of our residents do not fully comprehend the importance of an official community plan and the requirement that public engagement and consultation is required to make it valid. This plan has great impact on not only their living in Merritt, but the cost to live in Merritt. It is one of the most important documents a mayor and council will approve, as it sets the direction for staff to operate the city. Yes, it is a living document due to its status as an approved bylaw, but to deviate from any of the sections is not an easy nor simple task. Residents, business owners, and developers all reference this document for many financial decisions. To not place huge importance on this document would be irresponsible, which is why the OCP must be given every consideration in its creation to be right for the city of Merritt. Not for Kamloops, not for Kelowna, but for Merritt. To this, I would suggest delaying council's approval of the third reading until all of the recommended changes that will be coming forth this evening are made. There are several that need to be taken to the train. As Chair of Spam Holdings LP, we have concern over the significant changes in this OCP that will have a great impact on Spam's current and future plans. In the 2011 OCP, it is stated that there would be encouragement to develop a commercial node in the Gateway 286 sector, which includes commercial, office, and residential, which would consist of 3 stories, including medium density residential development. Now, this OCP section 4.3.61 states no residential uses at the former visitor center. For years, municipalities have come to the realization that in order to combat crime, you require people living in an area. They become the eyes and ears to ensure their place of residence isn't subject to loiterers, break-in entries, and vandalism. In the 2022 proposed OCP under section 3.4, land use designation, agriculture, it states that the lands to the north and south of Gateway 286 are to be designated agriculture, which restricts any further commercial or residential development in the area of 286. I believe this is short-sighted for Merritt's growth, especially since we have come to the realization that we must move future building to higher ground. It is no secret that our Valley's 5 First Nation bands have great vision for the 286 lands, and this OCP identifies on page 75 that the City of Merritt will endeavor to work alongside and to confer with these bands. Yet both the restriction to agricultural use and no residential sections on this land that is targeted for Aboriginal ownership goes against both the vision and the city's commitment to confer. We have very limited land mass that can be used for residential, commercial, and industrial, being surrounded by ALR designated lands, Crown and Reserve lands. So to restrict uses on land that has great potential for these uses just doesn't make sense to the desire of working together with our Valleys or Aboriginals. As a 48-year taxpayer, a lifelong resident, and a former mayor whose council oversaw the 2011 OCP update, I have concerns with the growth projections. Our population growth is currently stagnant. Between 2006 and 2011, Merritt was identified as 10th in the province for the slowest growth. My statement to the press at that time was citing our lack of power, which was stopping businesses from setting up here and even curbing residential development, as hydro could not accommodate any large subdivisions. Since 2013, we no longer have this concern, yet we have even less residents since then. In order to meet this OCP's population growth expectations of 3,023 residents over the next 20 years, we would need build between 1,500 and 2,000 new homes. In 2021, the city issued 93 residential unit building permits, which included several multifamily and high-density units. At this pace, it will take us over 22 years to reach the needed 2,000 units. With interest rates on the rise, developing of units will slow down considerably. There are currently over 400 units that have received council's approval over the past 8+ years, yet not one of these units have received a building permit. This OCP sets the Merritt up for failure. There are over 100 pages of development permit guidelines. This means that every development permit application needs to follow this mountain of guidelines, thereby creating frustration for staff and the applicants. With personal knowledge of how long it takes to get a rezoning completed, then a subdivision plan, and then a development permit, that time is costing both residents and developers money. I have not witnessed much social media comments as to support for this OCP or even against it, and I kind of wonder why. Was there sufficient public education made to the importance of this document? And was there sufficient public engagement made through the past 3 years of its creation? Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Rolene? Okay. I will call for third and final time for anyone to wish to speak for or against this bylaw. Please come forward now. Thank you.
Your Honor, councillors, I'm here tonight to represent both myself on one issue and my company, Ponderosa Pine Land Development Limited, on another. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jim Rabbit, and I live at 1742 Fairway Place. The property I wish to speak of first, and if I could ask to have the plan of Merritt put on the screen, I can then...
Do you have a...
The Appendix 1?
Okay.
No, pardon me. Yes, that'll show it then. Okay, and I want you to, can I just walk off site here?
Be aware that when you walk off site, nobody online can hear you.
That's fine, I'll go back to podium.
Okay.
This is the area I'm talking about.
Okay.
That actually isn't River Channel. There's an island there, which I own. It's called Lot L, Block 2, Plan 773, District Lot 124, KD-YD. When the city and the highways rebuilt Nickel Avenue, there was a bunch of low area that was filled in that particular area, including the old river channel. My concern tonight is that the legal lot, which I own, is not shown there. And in checking with City Hall a few days ago, I was able to talk with one of your administrators, and we checked it out, and it still hadn't been changed, although I had made the request in writing some time ago. So I'm here before you today to ask that it be reinstated, that Planning Department be directed to put all the properties in Merritt on the map. And I'm going to go one step further. If I want council to consider, because I will be bringing a letter forward, being that there is no river channel there, and being that there's properties built around the river channel within 5 feet of it, I'm going to suggest that we make a joint application with the 3 parties that are adjacent to that area, and that is the city with the golf course, the lot right to the east and my island. And if we can get the channel closed and consolidate that old channel into the affected parties of property, then it would make that a much more usable piece of property. Are there any questions?
Questions for Mr. Rabbit? Councillor Luck.
Hi, Jim. When you're talking about consolidating the channel, which three parties were you talking about? The city, the landowners, and DFO, or
No,
MOE, or would those be affected or should be involved in the discussion?
The riverbank hasn't existed there for over 40 years.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the property to the immediate east has a house built with the 5-foot or the 1.5 meter setback. So it'd be impossible to open that channel when you consider the channel is a maximum of 40 feet wide, and it would be about 15 feet deep at that point to have water run through it.
Okay, good. So you're going to be sending a letter to the city to pull everybody together?
If council would consider it, I certainly would.
Okay.
I think we would need a letter to even consider it. So right now, I'm not exactly sure what it looks like. I'm hearing you say it. It doesn't look like it on there. I need to see it. So we need a written request. Who am I going to first? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing that I'll note with this is he is correct that there is a parcel there, like a land title parcel, but one of the challenges with having rivers that move through your community is that rivers move, but land title boundaries don't move. And so what you see here is there's an really old river channel that was there from, I don't know, probably when land title applications were made in the 50s or 40s or 50s, that circles around what he's describing as his, stuff there. Yeah, perfect. So this represents what used to be a former river channel. This is the parcel that Mr. Abbott's talking about. And so this is not an isolated item or problem in our city. You'll find that there are lots of places where the bounds of the river are different than what land title represents. And if those changes happened because of accretion, there's a land title process to be able to distribute those lands to the parties. There is some legal stuff. We can bring a report on this, but I do want to note that as far as kind of map amendments go, we can take note and make sure that that's a little bit clearer that that whole area isn't river, that we're acknowledging that there's also a parcel there. But I'll leave it to you in terms of the application process to a separate time, because again, not that we can't do it, but there's probably a broader approach that we may need to take on a very, very large and intimidating land title change process.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I'll go to my primary issue with Ponderosa Land Development. Ponderosa Land Development owns what is commonly referred to as the remainder of District Lot 180, KDYD. And my primary concern there comes on Appendix 1. If we could bring Appendix 1 up and show the north bench. That's the property, yes. Now, if we can go to the active transportation map. Thank you. Okay, the Ponderosa owns the parcel that is encompassed right here. Yes, and the proposed road, Ring Road or Collector Road, whichever you want to call it, runs from Bellshaw right around to Juniper. And we...
Excuse me, runs from where?
Bellshaw Street.
Oh, Bellshaw, okay.
Runs right through the Crown land and through our property down to Juniper. And this concept has been there for years. The alignment has always been in the air because of the terrain. Now, I don't have a problem other than the last 300 meters or so with that concept. And what I am suggesting, and I've drawn a little map here, if I could have it distributed to the mayor and council.
Whoops, I just need one.
Okay, and I plagiarized the map off your OCP. But what I want to show you is what is on the left-hand side of your drawing. And I'm proposing that we extend that. The current alignment, and I realize that it says that it is called an alignment unknown road. But I find that with OCPs, that when a line gets drawn in the sand, it gets taken very literally. So if we're going to make an adjustment on there now is the time for us to do it. There's two reasons. Number one, two reasons that I'm bringing this forward. Number one, the grade on that alignment would end up at about 30% on the first few hundred meters, which is not good for you. It's not good for me. Second of all, the layout that we have designed for the development of that property wouldn't work with that particular alignment of road. Now, the collector road shouldn't be going through a developed subdivision. It should be an asset to that subdivision so that you can, if you're going north or east, you can jump on it, go to the other side of town without having to drive down and through the heart of the city. So I'm in full support of the system, just not the alignment. What I'm suggesting, and I've done it in black on your drawing, I'm suggesting that we cut across my property to the north of the cemetery property, come through there to the existing road that Henry Norgard built several years ago. It's twofold. We end up with about a 10 to 12% gradient, which is something the city could live with. And it also is an alignment that we can build our subdivision around, and we can use that road to spur off with subdivisions further up the hill. So with that being said, I would ask council to look at that. I wasn't that aware of the actual alignment earlier. I would have approached Mr. MacArthur and seen if we could have made that adjustment earlier. But we're all busy people, and some of us haven't been following the OCP as close as we should. So I'm here with hat in hand today. So is there any questions with regards to the drawing, councillors, Your Worship?
Does council have any questions? I have a request for staff to perhaps bring this to us for the next iteration. You've got it there, okay. It just helps to have it in writing, and staff's. Yeah. Any other questions for, Councillor White?
When you're coming around the cemetery, is that road going to be, are you saying that road coming at the back of the cemetery there will allow for more subdivision, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's roads on each side of the cemetery. One is a gravel road, the other is a paved stub road. The paved stub road is part of our proposed 14-lot subdivision that we've been working with the engineers on to try and bring to fruition.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So I hear you say that, and I'm totally lost as to what that is on the map, but I trust that staff will bring that to our attention so that we can discuss it.
Okay,
With that
Mr.
information in front
MacArthur,
of
do
us.
you have any questions with regards to that?
Mr. Smith? Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to acknowledge, when we've got the line from staff's perspective, this very much is an unaligned road, but Mr. Rabbit isn't wrong that, hey, we can't always guarantee what staff are going to be in the seat at any given time. And so if there's an alignment that you're comfortable and confident with, I think that it's not unreasonable that we would make that change beforehand. So,
And I trust that staff will be getting in touch with Mr. Rabbit to deal with that issue. Mr. MacArthur?
Yeah, and I can speak to this more at third reading, but when we talk about amendments, but this alignment was consistent with the active transportation plan, and that's why it made it into this map. So we can revise this, and that's not an issue. We might have to do some sort of revision to the active transportation later, but we can figure that out.
Good. And Councillor Etchart, did you have a question?
Well, I think a lot of us always just have questions because it's always nice to see an alternative route coming out of that mess over by Gasoline Alley because it's so congested. I mean, it's great for all the businesses that are up there, but having another route, it's always nice to see potential planning and the benefits that come from it. So anyway, but I believe this is the road that's right beside the end of Juniper, is it not? Right between the cemetery and the last house?
That's where it was designed to come out there. I'm suggesting that we move it over to the flagpole road.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right beside Norgard's, yeah. Yeah.
How fast are we going now?
Yeah.
It's almost like Merritt's very own ring road.
Yeah. So we'll,
Okay.
staff will bring that back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
I have one comment I'd like to leave with, and that is on the Appendix A. I've noticed that the land surrounding our property to the north and to the west is dark green park. It had been up to now future development. And I think with the focus that the OCP puts on not encroaching into agricultural ground, the area that we've lost to the floods, I don't think that we should be taking a Crown land bank like that and dedicating it as park. Dedicate it as open space, if you don't want to commit to anything else at this time, I think would be a step better for you and for future councils when they're needing development within the boundaries. So it doesn't directly affect our property, probably makes our property more valuable, that it doesn't have the potential of being developed. But in the interest of long-term with the city, you're going to get your 5% park regardless. When it's developed, you'll get your slice. So I think at this time, that's one thing I'd like you to have a second look at, is how much of that area has got the potential. Because when you drive around Kelowna, you can look at ground steeper than that they're developing very successfully. So I leave that with you, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. And is there anyone else that wishes to speak for or against this? This is third and final ask. Okay. I'm aware that city staff are proposing amendments to this OCP bylaw later in the meeting, which, if carried, could require an additional public hearing. So we can deal with that issue at the time it's discussed, and that's under agenda item number 8.1. So can I have a mover and a seconder that we return to the regular meeting of council? Luck and Etchart. And so we're returning. Oh, yeah, a vote would be appropriate. Yes, all in favor. Opposed, none. Carried. Thank you. Little vote that has so much meaning. Okay, so now we are moving to yeah. That's fine. Can I also ask 5.1.1? Are we receiving this next report that you're about to give us, or are we receiving the report that we just had? I've got an agenda item 5.1.1, the staff report from you. Okay, that was. We don't need to receive that. Okay, thank you. So yes, 5-minute recess. Thank you. We are back in session. We had left off at number 6, delegations. There are no delegations. Number 7, unfinished business. 7.1, there's a notice of motion from Councillor White. You need your mic.
So what do I do, just read this?
Yep, read it, move it,
Move it?
if that's what you're wanting. You're
Yeah.
wanting to move this notice of motion.
Yeah. I'd like to move that council instructs staff to investigate the installation of pedestrian crosswalk lights at the intersections of Nicola Avenue and Cleesby Street and Nicola Avenue and Blair Street.
She needs a seconder. Christofferson. And discussion?
I've had a number of people contact me on both of these streets, and both of them are major concerns. And just actually yesterday, somebody told me on Nicola and Blair, because the big trucks come down there, when they're turning the corner, they can't see people in the crosswalk. And they said there's been a number of times where somebody has almost got hit there just because of the lack of vision when they're coming around that corner.
Thank you. And Councillor Etchart. Oops.
No, I was next.
Sorry, Councillor Locke, you'll be
Anyway,
up next.
I was next. Thank you, sorry.
I've got Councillor Etchart. I mentioned that you would go next, sorry.
Okay. Yep.
When we had planned these originally, and they had put a light over at Garcia, and then they put one up by the hospital, I thought that Charlie had already had it in the plan that we were going to do 3 more, but that hasn't happened yet. Because after 2018, when we had discussed having the lights on, we had one put over at the post office, because that was after the 2018 vehicle accident that happened, and then one went up by the hospital, and then we have one on Nicola and Garcia. So I thought that we already had that in the plan, that was going to be one of the capital projects that got delayed. But
Mr. Smith, can you confirm here?
So the additional 3 did get put in. Again, we're confirming the location, but Vote up near the hospital, I think. Diamond, or not near the hospital.
Central.
Yeah, right here, as well as near Diamond Vale Elementary. We'll get you the 3 locations. The reason these ones didn't get hit, of course, it's the classic highways issue that I know you guys are so tired of hearing about. Yeah. But there isn't any reason we couldn't have a discussion with the Ministry of Transportation on this front. Between you and I think that they would love to divest themselves of that highway. And
Hold on.
Yeah, so either we can bring them in for a discussion on this point, should that be council's wish, or you could direct staff to follow up with them about the possibility of having those installed.
Thank you. Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, you've kind of said it. What my concern was, the reason for this is it's not Nicola Avenue, it's Highway 8. Well, it is Nicola Avenue, but Highway 8, and that is the concern there with MSS and that the school kids, and I think that's one of the biggest concerns there. So yeah, fully support the motion and what we can do to talk with MOTI on this one, because I think it's really important. Someone's going to get hurt there, I feel, in the near future. So hopefully they'll be will cooperate with us on that and see what we can do. So thank you for that.
Councillor Fair.
Similar to what's been said, I support the motion, and I think it is, high time that something be done to improve the safety. At the same time, I just want to say that I recognize, and I think that the citizens of Merritt should, try and recognize too, that this situation with a highway running through a small city isn't just in Merritt, and I think, it's a difficult one to manage no matter where you are, and these challenges we're having are the same as in other places. It's tough to work through, but I appreciate that we're trying.
Councillor White, did you have more to say?
Is Blair Street, is it a truck route to begin with? Because that's what's coming down there, are the big trucks.
Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Councillor White, through your worship. No, it's not a truck route, however, because at the location of Aspen Planers, trucks do use Blair because they access Aspen Planers from that direction, and so that's why we see trucks on Blair, and obviously that also is a safety concern for staff as well. I'm sure for council. So yeah, staff has already raised this last year with MOTI as mentioned at last meeting, and following that last council meeting, I was in touch with MOTI about this, and it's on the agenda for the next meeting with MOTI.
Okay. Thank you.
So staff are already looking into this issue. Do we need a resolution in order to? Okay. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to ask the question. All in favor? Opposed? None. Carried. Moving on to our bylaws. 8.1, Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2336, 2022, third reading. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Worship. So, of course, earlier this evening we had the public hearing for the OCP, and in addition to the comments that were raised during the public hearing, we have received comments from the Agricultural Land Commission, as well as a late item, as your worship mentioned earlier in the meeting. So staff are going to speak to first the comments from the public hearing, and then the late submission, and then the amendments that staff are proposing to make. So firstly, with regard to Ms. Rolene's comments, the Gateway 286 development, of course, has been in the works for many years, and of course is set out in the existing OCP. And the proposed development itself, from the beginning of that rezoning application, didn't include residential use in that proposal. So while that proposal didn't include residential use, the adjacent proposal from Palomino, of course, does include residential. So the OCP itself sets out for that area known as formerly Gateway 286 in the new bylaw, Ranchlands Village, and that residential would be allowed, of course, at the Palomino development, consistent with their rezoning application, and not permitted at the Gateway 286 or former visitor site, consistent with their rezoning application. So this was written to create consistency with the proposed developments between the zoning bylaw and the OCP. If council would like to change that, we can certainly explore that, but it's not staff's recommendation that we would do so, because this is consistent with the applications that were presented to us. So, and of course, those rezonings have been approved. The next comment are about the agricultural land on adjacent parcels and wanting future development designation rather than agricultural. The ALC specifically outlined that, and I'll go through their comments in a little bit, but in order to be compliant with the ALC Act, we shouldn't be designating parcels in our OCP that are inconsistent with the ALR. In other words, they have requested us that we make sure that any lands designated ALR are, that are in the ALR are designated as agricultural in our OCP. And if at some point a property owner would like to do an OCP amendment or to do some other development, they would need to bring forward an ALR exclusion application to the city that we would then put forward to the ALC. So it has to follow that legislative process. So we're not allowed to designate it that way. I mean, we could do it, but then we wouldn't be in compliance with the ALC Act, and the ALC would not be impressed with us. So staff are not recommending that we do that either.
So can I question further on that? There is a piece of it that has been excluded already.
Yes.
but not the other piece that is currently in process.
Yes, and
Okay.
so that's my next point, that there is an error on the agricultural interface map that shows the Gateway 2D6 parcel specifically within the ALR, or at least part of it in the ALR. That is an error that staff have already noticed, and we will be proposing amendment this evening to that. That mistake occurred because the original maps had been created before that ALR exclusion had been finalized.
Okay.
So that's where that came from, and unfortunately it wasn't caught before we brought the document for first reading. So we'll make sure we amend that, or we'll propose to council that you amend it. With regard to the population projections, I definitely understand what Ms. Rolene was saying with regard to the proposed projection of just over 10,000 people 20 years from now, which would be approximately $3,000 people, or 150 people average per year. That is an ambitious number. However, the population projection in the OCP is not one figure, it's actually a range. The low range is 8,362, which would be an increase of 1,311 people over the 20 years. So we have a range there. So the projection itself, we believe, having that range, we have a good target to hit. And obviously the ideal is that 10,074 persons, but we understand that it could be less or more than that. With respect to the DP guidelines, and this, of course, I did explain to council during committee of the whole when we were developing the bylaw. I believe it was Mr. Luck Councillor Luck that asked the question around the DP guidelines, and that there are quite a few guidelines in each development permit area. DP guidelines are just that, they're guidelines. They're guidelines for staff and also for developers. So staff can refer to those guidelines and choose which items to implement as part of a development permit. So that's a negotiation with the applicant. And the applicant can also use those development permit guidelines to guideline the design, because it shows what we would ideally like. We would like to see solar, but if solar is not possible, don't include it, right? So, we would like to see EV charging stations, or we would like to see shingles on roofs that are, colors that are lighter tone to ward off heat island effect, and all of these sorts of things. These are the ideal guidelines that we would like people to follow, but it doesn't mean that they will all be requested or required. And of course, development professionals do know this, including planners, so I don't have any concern that applicants will have any issues with that. With regard to the engagement and whether there was a potential lack of engagement, we did, of course, do 4 rounds of engagement over a 2-year period. So we held sessions online, in person, anything that we could figure out, open houses, open mic, we had Zoom meetings, we had workshops, we had online surveys, we had in-person surveys, we had booths at the farmers markets. We engaged with hundreds and hundreds of residents over that time. And so over those 4 rounds of engagement over a 2-year period, not only did we have a lot of interaction with residents, but we had a lot of great feedback. And that's especially the case in the fall of 2021, just before the flood. We had some really, really extensive and wonderful feedback from residents of the community. And of course, that helped make this document a lot stronger. So we really do appreciate everyone's input over those 4 rounds of engagement. With regard to Mr. Rabbit's comments, so the first one there, the parcel at Fairway Place, that is an error, and the reason I can see why that error occurred is the river has been overlaid as a layer, and so it's on top of his parcel, and unfortunately it wasn't caught that missing, went missing. There's over 3,500 parcels in the city, so it's hard to notice everyone. So I'm glad that he brought that to our attention, and I will make sure that that mapping correction is corrected if council directs staff through an amendment later this evening. The proposed bike route on Appendix I that he described with his map here, staff have no issues with changing that. As Mr. Smith mentioned, that is an alignment unknown line work on Appendix I. So that is a hypothetical or a potential sort of general, very generic routing. I'm not sure how many words I can use to describe alignment unknown, but it's not the final location, and it obviously would require negotiation not only with Mr. Rabbit, but with the Crown as well, as you can see. As well, it does run through NVIT lands. And it shows here a little corner of the other parcel there. That's owned by another resident as well. So, like I say, this is not the final alignment, but we're perfectly happy with changing that alignment. And I've written a quick amendment there that Your Worship has in front of you.
And when we're talking about other people to align with, when you talked about it aligning with the road on Norgard's property, there's another potential.
That's right. So even changing this would then obviously bring Norgard into that discussion. With regard to the designation of parkland on parcels, Crown-owned parcels to the north of Mr. Rabbit's Ponderosa site, staff have, of course, discussed this through Committee of the Wholes with Council, that we thought it prudent to not only designate those lands park because residents here use the trails up on the hillside, but also it's a high wildfire interface area. And so while those lands could potentially be subject to a Crown application or in the future, it's likely not wise to be building houses there. And I do understand, and I do note that Mr. Rabbit is not incorrect, that other cities are building on similar lands, but I also note that in both Kamloops and West Kelowna last summer, there was major fire issues in some of those neighborhoods. And so while it is a possibility to do that, it's also not modern best practice to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
The one thing I'll add as well is that a designation of park in the OCP is not a formal designation as park. So when you think of that, that is a separate process by bylaw. This is the aspirational thought for what that land ought to be used as. So it is possible to change an OCP designation as park. It is much more complicated to take a park that has formally been designated as such, and that's a separate process.
Yes, and further to Mr. Smith's comment there, of course, city staff wouldn't be proposing at this time any park dedication of those lands. Those are Crown lands. They're owned by the Crown, and other than the North Bench lands, of course, that is potential subject of a application in future. Right. Those other lands there's been no initiative on the part of the city to formalize or to acquire those lands to designate them as parks.
So can we have all other parks that are truly designated as bylaw still in the green? Does that make a difference? I mean, does that make a difference to developers as opposed to those of us who, I'm going to say us, that know it's not exactly a bylaw? And Mr. Smith?
Yeah, the key here is that you overlay the zoning with the official community plan. So we don't have so much of this in our community, but you go to anywhere in the Lower Mainland, you're going to find giant swaths where there's currently single-family residential, and that will be designated in the OCP as park. That doesn't mean that that's park. It means that should there be an opportunity in the future, the city is signaling its intent that they would like to create some form of park in that location. So where you see zoning as park and OCP as park, if we had dotted our I's correctly in every instance, that should be a fairly solid indication that it's been dedicated as park. But I want council to know that that is a separate park dedication bylaw, just zoning it as park doesn't dedicate it as park formally, but best practice is to do those two at the same time. And I unfortunately regret to tell you, Merritt hasn't always followed best practice in that arena.
Yes, and that's the case too with some of the parks that we did designate in the zoning bylaw in 2020. We haven't got around to yet designating them formally. So, so not all of our.
Yep.
So there's to be a park, you really need three. You need the OCP designation, the zoning zone as park, and then also the actual formal dedication process. So dedicating this as park in the land use map does not make it a park. It's just an aspirational statement, as Mr. Smith alluded to.
Thank you. And Councillor Luck?
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, that's what just clarity, because as soon as we pass this, guess what it becomes? Gospel. And so that was one of my biggest fears, and this is just make it very, very clear. That's maybe what it may become in the future. I think what I'm hearing here, it is not classified as park yet, but you know how they haven't had anything to do with this until now. As soon as it's passed, then everybody, oh look, there's a new park going in my area. So as long as we make sure we're very, very clear and specific on that, because that gets us into trouble in the future, right? But thank you for that. Yep.
Mr. Smith?
One more comment. It is critical to note, though, that this is council's statement of intent, functionally saying that we envision this as being park, and if that is not consistent with your vision and what you've heard from the public, then don't feel any pressure or obligation to make that move here. We've stated the legal effect, but this doesn't bind you to going down a road you're not comfortable with. If what you've heard has made you second guess as to whether that ought to be parked, that's just fine. You can ask for further information or whatever you please. But this is you saying that you envision that being park in the future, and that would give staff direction to, if we get an opportunity through Crown, through separate processes to make that land park, that's you telling us to go make that happen. So if you don't want us working towards that end, let us know.
That was my intent.
Yeah.
All right, so those were the comments during the public hearing earlier, but I'll speak to the late submission as well. So the first item was the reference to the agricultural designation on the Gateway 286 parcel, on lands adjacent to the Gateway 286 parcel. And as I mentioned, the ALC has asked us to obviously designate those lands as agricultural in our OCP because they are in the ALR. And if at some point in the future, a future property owner of those lands, whether that be SPIME or otherwise, would like to remove those lands from the ALR, there's an ALR exclusion process that of course has to occur before an OCP amendment. So that's provincial legislation. However, as mentioned, the agriculture interface map, which is Appendix K, staff are aware of the mapping error where the Gateway 286 parcel is shown as partially being in the ALR because it used to be, and we will, of course, be proposing that we make an amendment to that map to correct that error. With regard to urban villages, staff believe that there is an explanation of what an urban village is with regard to 15-minute neighborhoods. However, we have created an amendment or a proposed amendment for council to consider with regard to that, to add some additional language to make it crystal clear that an urban village is an area that includes amenities for residents within a walkable area. And of course, urban villages are discussed throughout the bylaw itself. Policy 12.2.22, it includes correct phrasing. So all of the maps within Appendix K are actually a part of Appendix K. So that is done correctly, and it was done intentionally to have all the DP maps within one appendices, and that way we could refer to that in the document itself. The Ranchlands neighborhood as well. Ranchlands neighborhood and Ranchlands village are not synonymous. Ranchlands urban village, or Ranchlands Village, urban village, is an urban village within the Ranchlands neighborhood. So it's a sub-area, as urban villages are, of a neighborhood, which is called Ranchlands. So the language around that is also correct in the OCP, and no amendment, in the opinion of staff, is required. Mr. Lois and I did discuss the removal, however, of agricultural parcels from the 15-minute neighborhood urban village map, Appendix B, and we didn't feel that it was necessary to do that. However, if council wishes so, we can, and I have an amendment that I've created for staff, or for council consideration. And the reasons Mr. Lois and I felt or agreed that it wasn't necessary, urban villages are an area, much like a neighborhood is an area. It's not specific to a particular land use, and while there are policies that refer to urban villages, it doesn't necessarily preclude agricultural from being within that area. So again, I've already spoken to Ms. Rurleen's comments, and this next comment is echoing that around residential at Gateway 2D6. That's not part of the application, and we've designed this to be consistent. So if we were to change that, we would have an inconsistency with that zoning that has been approved by council. So that's certainly something that council could consider, but staff are recommending that we don't do that. The DP guidelines I've also spoken to with regard to guidelines being guidelines that staff use to inform the development of development permits, and also provide guidance to development applications or developers that are applying to sort of tell them what our ideal development would look like. And if they meet a number of those criteria, that would usually result in approved development, right? So it's not that staff would require every single guideline from a DP guideline. And of course, that is standard practice in the planning profession. There is one amendment here that we would like to make around drive-through facilities. It is quite correct that the Gateway 2D6 zoning proposal is proposing to have a drive-through facility, or potentially multiple. We heard at the public hearing. So staff would like to have an amendment not to delete the non-permissiveness of drive-through facilities within urban villages, but to add an exception for this particular parcel. And the reason for that is we don't necessarily want to have drive-throughs in urban villages where we're trying to create a walkable neighborhood. So it wouldn't be appropriate, for example, in the city center, which is the urban village, or potentially other urban villages. So to delete that from the bylaw itself would be not a wise thing to do. Yeah. However, staff are recommending that we do make an exception for this particular parcel. So,
and when you say that, I'd like you to help me think of the concept of DeWolf Way and River Ranch and the drive-through concept that we have, and the mess with the road.
Yeah, and so that's why we specifically kept DeWolf Way out of the Grandview Village, urban village. So DeWolf Way is not contained within that urban village, as you can see on this map here, whereas the area south of Vote is the Grandview Village, where we're trying to create more of a walkable community around River Ranch and Forksdale area. So the idea is to not have drive-throughs south of there. Obviously, McDonald's and Tim Hortons have those, and those could continue existing as non-conforming with the OCP, and so that's not an issue.
Okay, just knowing that you're looking at the whole road concept makes me feel a little better about that.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the next item was around...
Oh, sorry, Councillor Luck.
So to help myself and maybe if the public can understand, then can you show us roughly where on this map that there's still possibilities for drive-through restaurants? Does that make sense what I'm asking there? Just
So
because we look at that and go, oh,
yeah.
no more drive-through restaurants. That's what it looks like. I
No,
think.
there's
No,
other,
south of
there's policies in the bylaw that talk about directing service commercial to certain areas.
Service commercial.
And service commercial areas would be like DeWolf Way, in behind Nicola, around Nicola and Douglas area, in behind there.
Mm-hmm.
Also by the airport, Walmart area,
That area,
and then of course Gateway 286. And so that's why staff are recommending that yes, we make an exception for this parcel, because of course they've proposed that as well. So those are the areas where drive-throughs would be. The OCP sets out that that's where we want service commercial activities.
I just want some clarity because somebody said all of a sudden here is that no more drive-throughs, and that's kind of might have what it sounded like. So that's a good clarification on that, Mr. MacArthur. Appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So just to speak it in the language you've discussed here, anything outside of the yellow that is service commercial is going to be a thumbs up for drive-through. If it's in that yellow area, not service commercial.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of looking at. So the yellow area is definitely
yellow's in general the no-go, with the exception of the proposed amendment for ranch lands.
Okay, now that some of the yellow is going to change on the ranch lands, is that right?
The yellow is going to stay. The yellow will still stay, but we'll add a text amendment. We're proposing a text amendment that will exclude that property. Yeah. Okay. And again, to reiterate, any drive-throughs that are already or other service commercial that
grandfathered.
Yeah, it's already there, so that's not subject to that.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Helps.
Okay, so the next item was around appendices L and M, and staff are aware that there is a spelling error there. Originally, we had called the appendices schedules, you might remember from the draft back in the fall, but for a legislative reason, we decided to call the document itself, the entire document, Appendix A Schedule A, and all of the appendices are there now called appendices. However, unfortunately, these two pages weren't updated, so staff are going to propose that we amend the titles of those two so that they are called Appendix L and Appendix M appropriately. So that was all of the items from that. So that brings me...
Can I stop you for a moment?
Yes,
Councillor
yes.
Merritt, did you have a...
Well, my only question was, when we were talking about the urban or the commercial in the yellow there, what if any of these businesses that already have the existing drive-through type services want to reconstruct bigger or do, anything like that where they would have to do major change of 75% of the, because that comes further up in your list of, if there was a fire or something like that, 75% damage. But what if they wanted to redevelop for something bigger on the same site?
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Etchart, through your worship. That's a great point. And so the legislative requirement or language around non-conforming use is that it can be altered as long as it doesn't exceed that 75% threshold. So if they were to tear down their existing structure and want to build new, then yes, it would be subject to the rules in the OCP. However, the zoning bylaw also comes into play. So if they're meeting the zoning bylaw requirements, then they could certainly also come to council for an amendment to the OCP.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
There's also one other mechanism that can be met, an alternative, and that is around preservation of use. And so if a property ceases to be used in the grandfathered use for a period of 6 months, that use is deemed to have discontinued, and admittedly there is some city discretion with it, but you're able to maintain that use can't revert back to its previous course. So if one of those were to become ghost town and then they say, hey, we want to start up a new drive-through, council could choose to allow it, but you are not obligated to at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so You all have the amendments, save the last two that Mayor Brown has, the additional two. Would you like me to read through all of them, or we can do that?
Are you wanting us to do a blank?
So I think first, if council could discuss whether you would like to postpone third reading until a future council date. July 19th is our next. So perhaps you could discuss that. And then if you want to do that, we could bring back a report with these amendments in the report. If you wanted to proceed today, we can also go through that, and then I can read through every single one of these and we can do it. So either way, yeah.
What are the wishes of council? Councillor Luck.
Mr. McCarthy, you read my mind. I was going to propose a motion to table this until all amendments have been incorporated into the document, everything's changed, so we have a nice cleaned up, not only for us to review and look at, but to present to the public as well. Because this kind of looks like, yeah, so, and looking at what some of the comments are made today. So I would propose that a motion that we table the document until the July 19th meeting for third and final reading of the OCP plan, if that works for you. So I'd like to make that motion.
Now, there's just one question I have for Mr. Lois before we go any further with that. The one additional amendment that Mr. Rabbit brought forward where his parcel is missing from the map, will that trigger is that a land use, or is that it's just a mapping, it's not a land use? Because we will actually have to have it like a designated use on it. It's hidden, it's there, but it's...
Yes, Mr. Lois.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. MacArthur. My understanding is that the issue on the map is that the river is currently overlaid as a layer when it shouldn't be, and that wasn't intended to be the case, in which case I would consider this to be a correction of a mapping error and not a change in land use.
Okay, great. So in that...
So to confirm, there's nothing in these proposed amendments that require a land use designation or require a change in land use?
Yeah, so if there was a change in land use or density, those would require another public hearing. But I believe it's the opinion of Mr. Lois and myself that there are no land use or density amendments in this list, at least, which in that case wouldn't require another public hearing. We would just bring it back for third reading.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Wanted to make sure, I really do not like when that is a consideration of council trying to avoid a public hearing, so please do not put any stock. We'll have a public hearing if we need to have a public hearing. The one in particular that you've heard tonight for your consideration prior to the vote is what was proposed by Mr. O'Lean in relation to potential expansion on that parcel to include residential uses. If council desires to consider that, that would put us in a public hearings. That is a change in use, but again, really ought not to be a consideration as you're having this discussion.
And the other thing that I would add to that as well, Your Worship, is that although a further public hearing would be required in certain situations, it is always at the discretion of council to request another one if you want to hear more information from the public. So you wouldn't, just because you're not in a situation where you are required to have one, you can still choose to have one if you wish to do so. So there are many options for you.
And if I may further to Mr. Lois and Mr. Smith's comments, we do have the necessary time to do the public notices for July 19th. So if you would desire to have another public hearing on July 19th, we can meet the advertising requirements.
But there is, to this point and the recommendations, nothing that would require a public hearing.
Other than, as Mr. Smith mentioned, if there was a desire to consider the amendment of having agricultural use changed to future development on lands adjacent to Gateway 286, that would require a public hearing if you were considering that amendment. As I did note, the ALC has asked us not to do that, but it's certainly your discretion as council to consider it.
And from my point of view, because it is an agricultural requirement, that at some point in the future, 286 can come back and review the zoning requirements at that time, right?
Yes, Your Worship. So if in future those lands were acquired by SPIAM or any other group, if they wanted to exclude them from the ALR, there's a process to do that, and that would need to be done obviously before a rezoning and OCP amendment is considered. So that process would still exist.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Luck, or Councillor Luck, did you have any other comments?
No, just I put the motion forward that we table this until next council.
Your light was still,
No, it's not yet. Until July 19th to identify and change all the amendments before proper passing. And personally, I just think it's a great way to go. Yeah, have a nice.
So you're
clean
moving
document.
to postpone third reading?
To table the appropriate term, yeah.
Are we postponing or tabling it?
You already did, I think.
Mr. Lewis?
Yep. Thank you, Worship. Under section 15C of the procedure bylaw, this would be to defer an item to a specified date, in this case, July 19th, 2022.
Okay, that's what wording's fine. I'm okay with that.
Defer is the right word.
Defer is the right word, okay.
And I've got a,
Because we're doing a staff.
Table, refer,
staff
defer.
report with amendments.
We
One at a
refer
time,
things to
please.
other bodies, we defer things to later consideration.
So I went on Google and looked up table, it worked, but anyway, that's fine.
And my caution is
Confirmed.
my caution about putting a date there as well is if there's something that causes us not to be able to do that for public notices reasons. So anyways, I'll leave that to you.
like, maybe
Like-
holidays of Mr. Lewis? We have a mover to defer. I need a seconder. Councillor Christopherson. And I'm going to call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None. Can you please turn your mic off, Councillor Luck? So we are deferring the whole works to the 19th. That's the goal anyways. Now we're moving back to is this
Sorry, Mayor. In reference to, did we want to have a quick discussion? Do we think do you think council would like to have the option of having a public hearing because of
We've
some of these
just,
changes, or did we decide not to? Because they're two separate items, Ron. Is that correct? Is this one item? We've referred it or deferred it or tabled it?
Mr. Lois?
Does that hinge on a public hearing or not?
You have deferred the third reading at this point,
Yeah.
and independently of that, if you want to have another public hearing, then the only question would be, do you want to have that public hearing before or after any amendments are actually made?
Oh, sorry.
I think what we just discussed before this was the fact that we were not going to do a public hearing based on the fact that there wasn't a land use. Mr. Smith.
So I'm going to make one comment here because I think that these can get tangled. In most bylaws, we like it to be clean and have it done within a meeting or two. It is not uncommon for OCPs to take 3 months to get from the spot where we are to final adoption because there are little things that come up. So what you've done right now, deferring it to the next meeting, we'll bring back some proposed amendments. If you choose to look at another amendment that necessitates another public hearing, world doesn't end with that. If you choose to make amendments that don't necessitate a public hearing, that's just fine too. If you choose to have another public hearing after that of your own volition, that's also okay. So I think that from the staff perspective, what you're doing is just fine.
Is it? Okay, good. I just wanted to touch base on that before we left it.
Councillor Richard.
I can agree with certain amendments, but I'm concerned that some of us talk more than others. And if we don't make a decision, it's going to go on and on and on and on. Thank you.
You do your share.
Thank you. And can you guys stop the conversation, please? Thank you. I would like to move on. This has been deferred. Deferred is the word, I think. We're moving to 8.2, Election Amendment Bylaw number 2337, 2022. Mr. Laus.
Thank you, Worship. I hope this will be a quicker item than the last one. This is, so at the last council meeting, you gave 3 readings to Election Amendment Bylaw 2337. And then, yep, this is essentially bringing it forward. Well, no, essentially about it. This is bringing it forward to you for adoption. We discussed the changes that it makes last time, so if you have any questions, then I am, of course, still here and available.
Questions for Mr. Lois? Seeing none, I'm asking for a motion that election amendment bylaw number 2337 2022 be adopted. Christopherson and Luck. And any comments, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Was that fast enough? Okay, new business 9.1. Economic Development Strategy 2022-2031. And Ms. Moore is going to give us the staff report.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just waiting for the presentation part. There we go. Good. All right, so the Economic Development Strategy 2022 to 2031 has been completed. Yahoo! I want to acknowledge that we received funding for this project to hire a rural business and community recovery advisor from the Economic Trust of the Southern Interior of BC. And this funded not only the completion of the economic development strategy, but also some COVID-19 economic recovery initiatives that the city had put in place or started in 2020. That grant was approximately $75,000 grant, and as I mentioned, it included hiring a staff person for a term of a year. We have a look at the timeline of the project. So the project started basically exactly 1 year ago. June 28th was the start date of my position. And it started with a pretty extensive document review, both internal documents and provincial and regional documents, as well as samples from other communities of economic development plans and strategies. Following the document review, we moved into the community engagement phase, which began with the first Coles China Street Market that I was involved in, and that was September 18th, 2021, where the public was invited to contribute their input, particularly with the 5 priority areas, which had been identified through the OCP engagement process. So as I mentioned, with the extensive document review, we were aligning this with existing documents and the documents that were being created, including the 2022 OCP update that's not quite yet adopted. That's okay. We also included industry sector focus groups, a few presentations at NBIT. We did have some disruption, of course, with the November 2021 Coldwater River flood. There was still lots of communication with business owners and managers throughout that time period. Some flood related and evacuation and return home related, but also some related to the economic development strategy. Document drafting began approximately February and through till May of this year, when we had the the draft strategy presented to the Committee of the Whole on May 31st. We then launched an online survey and had the draft document available to the public on our website for approximately 2 weeks. And also I forwarded the links to the document and the survey to some key stakeholders and those who had participated in the focus groups that we had held back in 2021. Just a few highlights about the document. I don't want to take too much of your time. As I mentioned, it does tie in with other municipal, regional, and provincial documents, and particularly with the 2022 OCP. The vision, mission, and guiding principles within the economic development strategy set the direction for the 10-year strategy. This is a 10-year timeline for this document. The 5 key priority areas tie back in with the vision, mission, and guiding principles. And the vision, the statement that we came up with is Merritt has a sustainable, resilient, and diverse economy with a vibrant city center, clean industry, and high-paying jobs. The 5 priority areas that I mentioned earlier are the promoting a vibrant city center, economic growth and diversification, business attraction and retention, increasing the housing supply within the urban villages and the city center, and as I mentioned in our committee of the whole, that because it's an economic development strategy, this is focusing more on where our commercial centers are, and increasing commercialization of the Merritt Airport area. I also want to highlight the targeted industries that we're focusing on. The strategy identifies 8 target industry sectors, and that's in line also with the recommendations in the 2022 OCP. In the short term, however, the business attraction strategies will be focused on the industries where especially in attraction, we can make an impact and have the greatest growth potential. And these are construction, light manufacturing, tourism and entertainment, and transportation, warehousing, and logistics. But of course, we wouldn't turn away any business investment interest from other industries, particularly within these top 8, but of course, other industry sectors as well. And business retention strategies are focused on existing businesses regardless of the industry sector. So we're looking to keep and help our existing businesses prosper. Each priority area has several strategies, and each strategy has several action items. So with a total of 43 strategies within the document and 211 action items over the 10-year timeline. Within the implementation and action plan, which for a lot of people, that's where the meat of the document is, it's giving us a timeline for each action. It also assigns responsibility to either a department within the city or another organization within the community. And the Development Services Department will lead the overall implementation of the strategy, including sharing these action items with other departments and organizations. The implementation plan will be the guiding document for economic development initiatives over the next 5 to 10 years. And the whole strategy should be updated every 5 years to remain relevant to the community and to the status and progress of these initiatives. Staff are recommending that Council adopt the Economic Development Strategy 2022 to 2031.
Thank you. And it's open for council. Questions, comments? Councillor Christofferson.
Well, an incredible amount of work has gone into this document. It certainly is. I have to admit, I've gone through it cursorily. I need way more time to do a really intelligent job of making it make sense. But I sure like what the overview is that I've done so far. And I know how much work it has been, and also a great deal of work that the committee has put in with it. So thank you very much.
And the question was? These are questions for staff.
How much time did it take you? No, I'm sorry.
I appreciate your comments. Seeing no other questions, Mr. Smith?
I do just want to put the offer on the table. Of course, we consulted with you at the draft stage, so I recognize this isn't the first time you've seen the document, but if you have a desire to dive into the action items in any greater detail, we can host a committee of the whole. So either at this meeting or through Mayor Brown, just let staff know if you would like kind of a further update. I can say, very excited to have Kim here as part of our strategies with communication. We will be taking elements of this and highlighting some of the good things that have already happened within this plan and many of the good things to come. So,
well, and even adopting it tonight will not stop us from having a committee of the whole to discuss it afterwards either.
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a mover that a council adopt the Economic Development Strategy 2022-2031. Councillor Fair, second Councillor Christofferson. And any discussion? Other than telling you it's a great plan, we're pleased with it. I would like to see a committee of the whole and delve into some of these after the fact, just so that we can, and our new communicator could probably handle some of that workshop approach as well. Mr. MacArthur.
And if I may, Your Worship, I just want to acknowledge the work that Ms. Moore and as well as all the other staff that have been working tirelessly on this project and providing input as well as council input along the way. Really appreciate working with Ms. Moore over the last year, and I know she's not leaving the city, but she is on her last day in this particular role as Economic Recovery Advisor. So just want to acknowledge the great work that she's done, not only on the economic development plan itself, but also with all of the other initiatives that she's worked on. So thank you very much, Ms. Moore.
Yes, absolutely. And we also know that there isn't much that comes to council that is done by one individual. We know that it's a team effort. We know you work together well as a team, and we're grateful for that. Thank you. It helps us move the city forward. So we know you were lead on this, Ms. Moore, and we appreciate that.
And if I may, Your Worship, just right back at Mr. MacArthur and Mr. Smith, Councillor Christofferson asked how many hours. I know there was a lot of hours of our time put into this as well. So,
yeah,
thank you.
All appreciated. And I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. And you've got it marked for a committee of the whole at some point, Mr. Lawes. Thank you. So we now come to 9.2, mutual aid agreement, District of Logan Lake. And Mr. Tompkinson is not here, so I'm assuming Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. I love when I get to talk to you about things in the fourth year of your term because I don't need to explain exactly what a mutual aid agreement is. So I'm going to give you the Coles Notes version. Anytime there is a large-scale fire, Chief used the word conflagration. I loved that in the report, where it is of a size and scope where we either need additional equipment or additional crews in order to get that fire under control. It is helpful to be able to call on our neighboring communities to be able to receive support from them and offer support should they be in that same scenario. And so this is a mutual aid agreement with the District of Logan Lake. Ours has recently expired and we are proposing a new agreement for a 5-year period. If there are any questions as to how the compensation works, if there is a call out under a mutual aid agreement, the pay is done in, I'm going to forget the word, I think it's the interagency operating agreement. So there's a set prescribed rate for equipment, firefighters, etc., to make sure that those municipalities basically have their costs covered in the event of a call. But it's an opportunity to expand our potential service capacity in those most significant events and then offer that support in the same. So we highly recommend that Council enter into the agreement attached.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, I need a mover that council authorize a fire service mutual aid agreement with the District of Logan Lake for a 5-year period from the date of execution under the terms herein, and that council authorize the mayor and chief administrative officer to sign on behalf of the city of Merritt. White and Luck. And discussion? We all know this is a great thing for both cities. We need each other. So I'm going to call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. So I'm asking now for notices of motion. I don't see any, so we'll move to reports from council. And before we go to council, I'd like to add a CAO report here at this point in time, a verbal report. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mayor Brown asked me to report on one item in particular, but I'll provide a little bit of an update around some other items as well. I think we're going to be making a CAO report a standing item, even if it is just oral in nature. So for the first is that council is likely aware and has heard in the news that in the TNRD boundaries area M and N, they've had a loss of some fire service provision as a result of the existing department not being able to provide service. This is an update for council that the city is actively working with the TNRD to find some interim opportunities to be able to provide fire support in that region. That includes setting out boundaries where we can feasibly provide that support, and that may not exactly align with the previous areas that did have support. That includes defining the service levels that we'll provide under the playbook, so whether this is going to be exterior or interior only services, and then making sure that whatever we do, that City of Merritt isn't going to be subsidizing that service, that the costs are going to be adequately covered should the city enter into something. So what we're proposing with this, because of the kind of expeditious nature and the concern that some folks in the TNRD are having over this, is that we proceed with entering into some form of agreement in the interim that meets those objectives, but we have communicated to the TNRD and from the staff perspective that if this is anything that's going to extend for more than just a period of months, we feel that we need to be bringing this to you as council to determine whether you want to expand our potential service areas outside of our existing service area. And so we will be looking at how we can provide support in the interim without formalizing that through council. But if there is going to be anything over a period of months, that we're going to continue to work with the TNRD and bring a report back to council and receive direction as to whether we would enter into a longer term agreement to provide this service after things have been more completely costed, thought through. So that's what we're proposing. If council has any concerns with that, I can certainly take direction on that front. The other item that I want to address is that it is not a surprise to council or those in the public that with the challenges that our community has faced over the course of the last year, there has been challenges within the city itself, particularly in the areas of staffing. We've had a number of people in recent months who have found other opportunities or for a variety of reasons have chosen to move on. We're really happy to announce that we're kind of starting the wave of seeing these new hires come on board and getting those roles filled. First, really good to have Kim here in our communications and engagement role. Council is well aware that we had made this decision to pivot from just a pure communications function because we did feel it was so important that we capture that two-way conversation with the public. And so the communication and engagement portion has been added onto that role. We have a number of other positions that we hope to be able to announce the filling of here, likely at the next council meeting. So things are starting to starting to get some traction there on the hiring front. I'm very happy to report that. The other item that hasn't come up tonight that we do want the public to be aware of is we do have our open house tomorrow night for, I'm going to call it all things recovery, that will range from what has happened with our very preliminary diking plan that we're releasing to public for our preliminary discussions here that would inform our discussions with other levels of government. But we also want to make sure the public knows that we're going to have representatives from a lot of different agencies there, ranging from DFA, Red Cross. We've got 12 different groups that are going to be at that open house. So if you are a resident with questions, with concerns, you're wanting to talk something through, you're wanting to get information, this is an excellent event for you, and we encourage you to come on down tomorrow evening to the Civic Center.
And the start time?
6:30.
And the end time?
Whenever people start scaling out.
Okay. Fair enough. And I did say to one resident that they were worried that there was going to be too many people there and they wouldn't get a chance to make it around. And I said, well, if that's the case and if we're that busy, we'd hold another night. So we can gauge that tomorrow night.
The way we've got it set up as well is we recognize there might be some booths that are more popular than others. I really want everyone to know that this is the start of what is going to be many conversations, and that we're not at a spot where any decisions have been made right now. This is us talking about getting some document out there, getting some feedback on it, because this is what's going to allow us to start discussions really for much larger projects with the provincial and federal governments. We of course have had theoretical discussions, but theoretical doesn't cut it. You got to start having some tangible meat to chew on with those. So as you've indicated, Your Worship, I can guarantee we're going to have many more of these as we start diving into greater detail, as costing becomes more firm, as we start identifying potential funding sources. Because as it stands right now, Council is aware, but maybe not all of the public is, the disaster mitigation and adaptation funding stream, which we were targeting with this, has closed. It was significantly oversubscribed, well over $1 billion, and they've closed further intake. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we go find further sources of funding, because that primary mechanism that we were looking towards is no longer available.
And that was the fund that...
that's a kick in the pants. I'm like full disclosure, that sucks.
Yeah, that's the one we were asked to apply to. That was Minister Blair who suggested we apply to that one. So I'll be having a conversation with Mr. Blair. Maybe he can point us in another direction.
That's correct. That's tomorrow's.
Thank you. And are you done? Any questions for Mr. Smith?
My only question was, you had touched on the agreement with the TNRD about the fire, and that was a big concern because I think since Thursday, that's been a lot of questions that we've all been getting. And the impact is far-reaching. It's really impactful. So if it's a short window, it's not a big concern, but if it goes on for any extended period, it's going to impact people heavily, a lot more than any tax increase we could ever imagine. So I know that a lot of residents are really worried whether they live in Lurnicola or Coldwater Road or wherever. And there's a lot, and the calls are constant. So I think everybody's probably been hearing that. So anyway, but you already brought it up, so thank you for that.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Councillor Archart. And one of the things, typically this is something that we would nail down and bring to you, because we're talking about providing a service outside your municipality. This is something that needs board approval at the TNRD. Like, there is process to this that I fully acknowledge we are 100% skirting because of exactly what you're talking about. We'll find an interim solution because we need to provide that support. We're also not going to do it blindly. We have to know what the costs are. We have to be able to provide the service in an effective manner. We have to have the right mapping for it. Because if we just say today, hey, we're going to respond to stuff, we could be putting people and our firefighters in positions where they're not going to be set up for success, and the costs of providing that service are going to fall on Merrittonians. And so we've been talking very regularly over the last couple days, and I think it's highly likely that we're going to land on a short-term agreement as we work towards the longer one.
Did you still have another comment?
Just a second piece to that. I know that in some communities where they don't have a fire hall and whatnot, they also have a pumper service, which I don't know if that could help in some of the rural, if there's any agreement through satellite agreement or anything, but just a thought. Just all the questions that have come up, it was just a thought that worked, I think, in the CSRD, where they had super pumper service, which is approved by Fire Underwriter Survey. So thank you.
And I know there's bound to be discussion too about the potential for a satellite service at some point in the future, but we're not there. We're not there yet. At some point. And if I can back this up for economic development strategy, we received $75,000 from ETSI-BC. I meant to say I am an executor on the board. Executive.
Who died?
Yeah, executive on the board, and ETSI board members do not have any input into the actual approval of the grants. So this grant was provided without my signature, just so you know. There wasn't any conflict there. So any other questions for Mr. Smith regarding these other two issues? Before we get into council reports, I want to say thank you to Mr. Lawes for the last 3 weeks of doing the acting CAO job while still holding down his other job, working till 8 p.m. here, going home and working till midnight over that 3-week period. And you held down both jobs exceptionally well. And I want to stress that exceptionally. I think we were really, really pleased with the ongoing the ongoing workings of the city, almost to the point that we maybe didn't need a CAO. I'm really kidding when I say that. But things went very, very well, and I just want to say thank you very much. I mean, he's finished all the UBCM minister reports because we've had to apply for. There's a lot of extra work that you did in that time frame, and I just want to let you know that we are really grateful. Thank you. We're still grateful that our CAO came back too.
Not more grateful than me.
Yeah. Now reports from council. Councillor Christopherson.
Yeah, I was just really pleased and honored to represent the city as deputy mayor at the Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. It was an excellent opportunity to recognize and support the Indigenous culture in this area. There was a huge turnout, lots of folks, and I think all of the schools were represented there, so there was lots of people in the park on a beautiful day until the wind came up. But it was a really good opportunity to represent the city, so thank you.
People do know that the wind does come up in Merritt, right?
Occasionally.
Yeah. Thank you for that representation. Anybody else have anything? Seeing none, moving on to information items. And 12.1, the 2021 Development Cost Charges Report. Mr. Thompson is available for questions if anyone has any for him. Nothing. Okay, well, they'll move on to the 12.2, the annual report, 2021. And this, we don't even need it for information. It's just the report.
It's required to go to council, Your Worship, and it has been available on our website and at Front Hall of City front counter of City Hall for any residents who want to see it. I believe a couple have come through and had a word. And again, if anyone had any questions about it, then the public input session at the beginning of this meeting would have been the time when we would have expected public to raise them. If any of you have any comments or questions, then this was essentially a joint effort by all departments across the city to provide a public record of what we've been up to over the last year and what we intend to be up to in 2022, setting targets and seeing how we measured up against last year's target. So if you have any questions or comments about that, then any individual department would be happy to take them, but you don't have to take a specific vote to accept it. It is just the report on what we've done.
Thank you. We won't take the vote then if we don't need to. I just want to say I'm impressed with how much we got done last year, despite the fact that half our year was taken up with evacuation alerts and orders. And so thank you to all the staff for the last year, all of it. The hard work that we had done operationally, but also the hard work that we had thrust upon us through fires and floods. So I've never seen a team work together as well as this team did to get us through this year and still come out with an annual report that looks like we were doing this the whole time. So just let the staff know that council is happy with the performance of staff over the last year. And that brings us to the termination of this meeting.